A nasty race is developing in the run for U.S. Senate here in Louisiana. Republican John Kennedy wants to replace incumbent Democrat Mary Landrieu. This won't go to a vote until November 4th, since Kennedy and Landrieu are both unopposed in their party primaries on October 4th. But it is a nasty race so far, and Kennedy's going after Landrieu on one point for the earmark, the $2 million earmark that she got into legislation for a D.C. learning program, and then she got $80,000 from the group that got that earmark. Does that have any traction here?
I think it's going to have some traction, but mostly among people that don't like Mary Landrieu anyway. The people who like Landrieu don't care about that because they say, well, she brought much more than that to Louisiana. And
in earmarks,
in other ways. Right. I mean, Mary Landrieu single-handedly bailed out the Road Home program. If she hadn't been on the Appropriations Committee in the Senate, the Road Home program would have been $3 billion short.
And actually,
that's her message. So
she really did a lot after Katrina for Louisiana.
A tremendous amount. And that's her campaign. I think you got two different campaigns waging here, and they're almost fighting on different planes. Kennedy's running a campaign based on philosophy, an end to earmarks, fiscal this, and Landrieu's running a campaign based upon experience, leadership, and deliverance. You know, I'm going to deliver the goods, whether it's through earmarks or something else, and seniority. And this is a year in which Louisiana has lost a ton of seniority.
Here's another point about that campaign. Kennedy seems to be running the traditional anti-Washington establishment campaign for voters in other states. And he's almost channeling the McCain message. If you don't like Washington, you don't like the culture of Washington, you have to change the senator. It's somewhat difficult given the fact that Senator Landrieu has been very effective in Congress, especially post-Katrina, and she does have a record in terms of delivering resources to constituents. And in reference to the earmark piece, elected officials in Congress, they have to bring back services and resources to constituents. How do they do that?
But this was in Washington, D.C.
Right, but she also was probably part of other earmarks for this particular state.
Oh, she brought a lot of earmarks here, but I mean, the complaint was that this one was going to D.C. and then she got $80,000 in
she's
campaign
also on the board. He's not telling the whole story in terms of she is part of that oversight.
Gotcha.
Well, what happens in D.C. stays in D.C. when it comes to small earmarks. And you know, my real question with this race is, where was Kennedy's campaign in the first week or so after Landrieu began hitting him really hard? It took too long.
Like 2 weeks.
Too long for the Kennedy campaign to come back and respond to those attacks on Social Security. And not the confused politician in general, but the Social Security business, which has been called dirty politics, was certainly tough politics. You know, if you're in a fight and somebody hits you, you've got to hit back.
But the timing of that was so interesting, Professor, because she launched her attacks to one confused politician right when Kennedy began defining himself.
Yes.
And I thought it was a brilliant move on her part for two reasons. One, he's still not that well known, so as he defines himself, she comes in with a different message saying, no, this is how he's defined, and he didn't respond to that for at least 2 weeks. And he just kept running the same one, and she kept running the confused politician, and that's become a tagline for her.
Yes.
The other thing that I thought was significant, in her last two races for the Senate, Landrieu was the one who took the first hits. This time, she's dishing it out a lot faster.
And she barely won those
And she's got much more money. Well, she barely won the first one. The second one, she won about 42,000 votes.
But, you know, I've read that this is supposed to be the toughest challenger she's faced, and yet she's leading in the polls.
He was supposed to be.
He was supposed to be.
With all of his things from when he ran as a liberal.
Just 4 years ago.
So he should have responded that first night. If he didn't know that was coming, I don't know, he must have been asleep.
Well, you know, she learned that you don't wait and let your opponent, one, define you, and you don't take punches. And so you have to define your opponent first. And it looks like she was very effective in utilizing those resources to buy more airtime to define John Kennedy.
The other key is she's got a lot more money than him, so she wanted to engage him, hoping he would respond, because then he'd have to spend all that money that the little bit of money that he's got compared to her. They both have a lot of money, but she's got 2 or 3 times the money he's got. So she wanted to say, all right, you want to race? Start spending money right now.
So what happens between now and November 4th? I mean, where does it go from here?
I think you're going to see the 527 organizations weigh in, the so-called independent, which are not independent at all, but under the law they're independent.
We're seeing that now to some extent, especially with the commercial in reference to health insurance for children. And it says call Senator Landrieu. and it's not a negative piece, but it's a health insurance for children piece.
Clancy, you mentioned seniority. That is a big issue for Louisiana, and Landrieu has the seniority. I mean, how does he fight that? How can
he doesn't. He has to ignore it, which is because he can't win that fight. He can't say, I'm going to go out there and be more influential.
He's
than
also
Mary
the
Landrieu.
minority
He's in the
party.
minority party. He's going to be on what I like to call the toilet bowl committee, something that means nothing. He'll be the most junior person in the Senate, and she's on appropriations. Well, he has to hit her on something else, and that's what he's doing.
You know, if Louisiana were not hurting right now, and if Louisiana did not need all the help that a seasoned, experienced politician in D.C. can bring to us, then I would think the Kennedy campaign would have a much better chance of unseating Landrieu. But Landrieu, because she's running smart, I would say on two levels. You know, she is running on her experience and her competence, and she's also running a strong negative campaign against her opponent. And it's awfully tough for Kennedy now. So I look forward to seeing what he does.
And for Louisiana, she took the right position on drilling for oil.
Yes, very pragmatic. Yes, the attempt by the Kennedy side to bash her on the oil issue because of drilling in shale. No, I don't think that has any resonance here, because we know what Louisiana voters know, that Mary Landrieu, as she reminds us in her campaigns, led the fight to bring oil royalty revenue to the state.
And it was actually her bill that passed.
Another thing is she is running what I call a sword and shield campaign. In terms of she is using the sword basically to chop on John Kennedy while shielding herself from attack and building an image and getting her record out there. So it's a very effective strategy, which I don't see John Kennedy being very successful at.
What is Kennedy doing right? Where is he getting traction right now?
There isn't much he can do that is right. I mean, he's got such a record. He's running both Republican and a Democrat. It's very difficult.
He has tried to tie Landrieu to the Blanco legacy. I mean, has that been effective at all for him?
I don't think so.
No, that won't be.
I think the most effective campaigning on behalf of John Kennedy will not come from the Kennedy campaign. It will be the attacks from the 527 committees, the so-called independent committees. They're going to break out the long knives right after October 4th and go after Landrieu. If he's got a shot at all, that's going to be
They're going to have to up the ante.
And what kinds of things will we hear? What kind of attacks will we hear?
It'll be the same stuff we always heard. Landrieu the liberal, the big tax and spender. And that's been done before. And when she was really vulnerable on those counts earlier in her career, it didn't work. It's an interesting thing about the Republican strategy against Mary Landrieu. In her first race for Senate, the candidate against her on the Republican side was Woody Jenkins, a true right-winger.
Right.
6 years later, they recruited Susie Terrell, who was a moderate Republican, and they painted her as a right-winger, and that didn't work. She lost by 42,000 votes. Woody Jenkins lost by less than 6,000. So they could almost beat her with a true right-winger. With a faux right-winger, they lost by 42,000. So then they went out and got a liberal Democrat, and they're posing him as a right-winger.
All right.
They're moving in the wrong direction.
We're going to move on to the House of Representatives next. We'll be back with a look at the race for Congress in District 2 when our Campaign 2008 special continues.